Okay, welcome back. In this video, I'm picking up with the same scene that I had before. I still have this spotlight in here and whatnot. And what we're going to do is talk about area lights. And area lights work a little bit different than your standard XSI lights. So let's have a look and see how that works. Let me delete this light that I created before simply by selecting it here and hitting delete. Okay, so now I have no lights left and everything's pitch black again. So let's go back to the primitive menu. I'm going to go to lights, tear this menu off again, and let's have a look at some of these area lights. You'll see here we have light box. Let's go ahead and select light box. And if we go ahead and close the PPG and frame in on this light box, you notice that the light box looks suspiciously similar to a regular spotlight. That's because essentially that's exactly what it is. So what's the difference? The difference is if we click on the spotlight or the light box and hit enter on the keyboard to open up the PPG, we'll go to the area tab over here and you notice that the area light parameter is checked on. The default behavior is for the area light parameter to be checked off. What the light box actually is, it's just the same spotlight, just with this parameter turned on. So if we turn it off, voila, what does that look like? Oh, it looks like your standard spotlight. So the only difference between the spotlight and the light box is the fact that a light box has this option checked on when you create it. That's it. Okay. Now you notice that there's this square right here around the spotlight. That icon represents the actual area light itself. If you notice over here on the geometry, we can switch the area light from a rectangle to a disc, and you notice the icon changes into a disc. We can select a sphere or a cylinder. Every one of these shapes will change the look and the feel of the light. So what I'm going to do is take the light and put it out here somewhere, and I'll do a render region and see what we have. This area light, what it does, it creates these nice soft shadows. This is essential for doing photorealistic renderings with XSI and mental ray. So area lights are good. The downside to using area lights is that when you have them cast shadows, which we'll do now, we'll turn on shadows, take the umbra all the way down. Now let's bring back our render region again. You'll notice now that the render is taking a little bit longer to perform. If we zoom in here, there's our render with our shadows. Now these shadows look great. They're physically accurate, they're beautiful, they're very realistic, and they make our objects look awesome. The downside to them though is that to get the quality to look good, we have to increase this number of samples here, which is by default set to 3 and 3 in the U and V channels. If we go ahead and increase that to about 6 and 6, we're going to end up with a much nicer render. But as you can see in my viewport here, the render region is having a little bit of trouble keeping up. It's actually rendering a lot slower. Now the quality looks fantastic compared to before. We got rid of most, if not all, of that graininess, and these shadows are looking very realistic, extremely awesome. Of course, the downside to it is if you want this nice look to your shadows, you're going to be hit with a little bit of rendering slowness, so to speak. So you're trading in quality for speed. If you want this nice quality area light shadows, you're going to end up sacrificing render speed. So just keep that in mind. If you're doing something that's supposed to be photorealistic, I strongly recommend that you stick to area lights and shadows as opposed to using the regular XSI standard lights. So now what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to take this light and get rid of it. And now what I'll do is I'll bring in another type of area light here, which is the neon light. So let's create a neon light. And if I move it up, you'll see what we have. So here's the icon for the neon light. The neon light essentially is just a point light with the area light parameter turned on. If I go to the area tab over here and the lights PPG, you notice that the area light parameter is turned on. If I turn it off, basically all we get is a regular point light. If we turn it on, we get a neon light. And the way the neon light works is pretty simple. Automatically, the geometry is set to rectangle, and the samples are set to 10 and 3, and the scale is set to 10 and 0.3. 10 in the X, 0.3 in the Y. What this means is that the actual scale is pretty much elongated, almost like a neon light tube or a fluorescent light tube in a warehouse or in a shopping mall. Basically, you see them all over the place. And it's those long light tubes that you see on the ceiling that are very bright. So essentially, if we come in here and we render this out, we get this nice render. Of course, we don't have shadows on, so let's turn shadows on and turn the Umbra all the way off. The reason I like to turn the Umbra all the way off is because, well, Umbra tries to imitate this sort of indirect illumination in your shadows, which works kind of like the ambience parameter that we covered in a previous video, and it doesn't look too good. So Umbra can hurt the photorealism quality of your render, so it's good to turn it off. If you're not going for photorealism, you can have Umbra turned up if you want to or you need to for whatever reason. For the most part, I like to turn it completely off and let my lighting control the way that my shadows look. So you can see these shadows look awesome, and this swiggly thing is creating these beautiful soft shadows on the ground because of the neon light that's just overhead. So the neon light is actually pretty awesome. Okay, it's going to take a little bit longer to render because, of course, it's an AreaLight. So standard lights are faster to render, but they look pretty ugly and not realistic. AreaLights are beautiful, render slow, but they look great and are more photorealistic. So it's really up to you as to what your needs are for your project and what you can get away with. Okay, so that's going to cover neon light. Now, in terms of the manipulator, if we hit B for Bravo on the keyboard, we can actually activate that manipulator tool that we used earlier in the previous video when we were looking at the standard lights and we were looking at the spotlight. When we hit B, you can use the tab key to cycle through different tools. We can use this tool, for example, which is the manipulator tool that allows you to scale this object or whatnot. In this case, we can't really scale it too much because we can't do much to it. It's a light. As you can see, we could increase the size of the light, which will change the lighting. In this case, for the point light, we can make it bigger, or we can make the point light smaller. But that's not exactly what we're after. Let's hit tab again, and then one more time, and you'll see now that the actual AreaLight icon is highlighted in sort of this bold white. So in this bold white color, so it's really bright now. What we can do is click on the edges to actually increase or decrease the size of this so we can interactively scale it. Without that tool, you would have to come over here and input numbers. Like, let's say if I wanted to make it 15 units in the X, I would have to type in 15. And the Y, if I wanted it to be 0.5, I'd have to type in 0.5. And that can become a little bit cumbersome and annoying. So what you can do is simply use this manipulator tool by hitting B on the keyboard and just hitting the tab key until you cycle to this mode, which is the AreaLight manipulator mode. And now you can just go ahead and scale this interactively. So you can make the neon light bigger or smaller or wider, and we can actually take this and rotate it so it's facing down, and it can actually change the entire look of the shadows and the lighting in our scene. So AreaLights are actually pretty sensitive to movement. If you rotate them, if you move them, if you change the scale, if you change the length or the width, it'll actually affect the way that the shadows are projected in the scene. And this looks pretty photorealistic actually. It looks pretty cool, like this nice studio lighting. You can see this nice highlight on top of the sphere. So these AreaLights are great for realism. Of course, they're a little bit slower to render, but they're well worth the wait and render time because the beautiful realism that these lights can bring to your scene is simply amazing. Okay, I'm going to end this video here because we've been talking about this long enough. And in the next video, we're going to open up our first production scene and see how we can use some of the information and knowledge that we've gained so far up to this point in the tutorial and put that to use in an actual production scene. So I'll see you in the next video.